Um, well, last week, we had you guys share with us about how that the Lord called you to himself in terms of your personal salvation. And that was very interesting. If folks want to go back and review or see that for the first time, it's available on, I think it's my YouTube channel or yours, Amy. You can check Ralph Ackley or Amy Ackley YouTube. You'll find a lot of good interviews on there, but it's one or the other, and we cleaned it up really good. So we got rid of any dead air, anything like that, any kind of introductions that sometimes we do to let people know what sort of guests that we're anticipating for the next few weeks. You guys also shared how that you end up meeting each other and how that the Hudsons kind of set you up and a remote trip around the lake in Charlotte. I thought that was very sweet. And I know it really touched my heart. And we're coming up on Valentine's Day, so that was kind of neat. And I know a lot of people were able to see it, some weren't, so that we were able to share that link with them later on and personally also. Before we go any further, I do want to let people know, I don't know if you know, a lot of people down east, but there was a tragic fire in East Machias for a couple of friends that people you may know, the Fritzes, their house burned down to the ground. And so we want to let folks know that if you would like to give to them, there's a GoFund account, and there is also a snail mail account where you can send some donation to that couple, Chuck and his wife, the Fritzes, longtime members of some of the Baptist churches back home. And if folks want to keep them in prayer, they certainly need that. But I noticed on your website, on your Facebook page, Paul, and there is a way to share that tonight. There's a share screen. Let me see if I can get it on. You had put on your Facebook page a YouTube video of you and your brothers and your dad doing the bells. Now there's no audio to it, but wow, that was amazing. Let's see if people can see the share screen. If they're not, I'm going to share it now. I've got the video from YouTube up there. I'm going to play it, but the speed with which you and your brothers, and I guess your dad later in this video, play these bells, it's amazing. Oh, wow. You're just picking them up. It looks like random, but I know there's nothing random with these bells that you picked up. Your dad was a youth evangelist back in the day. I think this may be you with your dad there. If you can see that, he's got a carnation and it looks like a tuxedo. It's incredible. Wow. 32-second video, but we just want to let people be aware of that.
That's cool.
And it was really cool to, because you talked last week about how that you grew up in a pretty, you were in a Christian environment, whereas Pam did not. And your dad in the summer would travel with 5 brothers and evangelize around the country, youth conventions and conferences and summer camps, I think. So, yeah, and if you want to add to that, that's fine. But to see that video, I thought, wow, that was so cool. And
were those cowbells?
They're called Piccolo Bells. They are shaped like a cowbell, but they're cast bronze. And the fellow that created them had the forms buried with him, so there were not any more made. So they're a rare thing. But what you thought was me playing there was my oldest brother, and he's 9 years older than me. So when that was made, I was probably 2 or 3 years old. And when the two that were playing together are twin brothers, they're 4 years older than me. And they were probably about 7 then. So I didn't start playing the bells until I was 5. So it was a few years yet before I started playing them. I could barely reach them, and I would be playing them.
That is so cool.
Even though we didn't hear it, could you tell? Do you remember? I'm sure one of your brothers has told you what that particular tune was. That maybe
it could have been "Lily of the Valley."
Okay.
It could have been "Saved."
Yes.
Okay.
Or there's a couple of songs. We had about a repertoire of maybe 40 or 40 plus songs, and we would put those on through a whole week of meetings.
Yeah.
Wow. And it must take a lot of practice to know.
We were playing every day, so we were practicing every day.
Right.
So
Right.
let's catch up to speed where you guys have, where we left off last week. Your courtship, your marriage, training in Florida, I believe, right? With, at the time, New Tribes Missions. And you received your assignment, your calling that God had specified to the Colombia, South America area.
Right.
Just sort of review exactly what you had said to us about how that God spoke to you about that particular area. And I think you had shared that with Pam, and she was ready to go to that specific area. Kind of maybe review some of that.
Well, when I was a teenager, a young teenager in Brazil, we kept hearing about the atrocities that were going on in Colombia. And it really stuck out to me, and it made me realize that there were some very tough places for Christians to be.
Mhm.
And somehow that kind of stuck in my mind. And so when we were in language school and we were headed for Bolivia to do contact work down there. That's going out and reaching a tribal people that were not civilized. They usually, if they came in contact with a national, say in that country,
Mhm.
they might shoot them with an arrow or with a poison dart or what, just they didn't want anybody outside of their group in their territories. And so anyway, but when we were getting ready to go, the field of Colombia opened up, and it was just like the Lord said, I want you to go to Colombia. And so I talked with Pam about it, even though we had been corresponding with Bolivia already.
Okay.
To go there. I brought it up to Pam, and she said, yeah, let's go. And so I let the other folks know that, and they were taking in missionaries at that time, and where they hadn't been allowing missionaries to come in, and not giving visas for missionaries to come into Colombia until that time. So anyway, that was how we got there.
And that itself, the fact that you could get in and that the Lord opened the door right about that time to that specific geographic area, and that they let you change your area of calling, must have been some confirmation that certainly God had actually spoken to you and opened that door. Yeah, amazing.
We could choose where we wanted to go, where we
okay.
felt the Lord had us to go.
That's cool. That's
And
good.
you hadn't really settled concretely at that time then, whether it be Bolivia or Colombia.
Yeah, well, we had been in communication with the Bolivian field, and they were ready for us to come. Nothing was set up on that end yet. When we would get there, we would have to get a house and get settled in and do language study, whatever, in any kind of country that we went into. So anyway, when we let them know that we were switching over to Colombia, they were fine with that. And Colombia, of course, they were saying, come, with open arms. They wanted us to come. So they had, I believe it was 46 tribes in Colombia that needed people to work in them. And so
when you went, there was already some work established. How did the process work out where you were able to find a language group, a specific group there in that country, to which they felt, the Lord felt, and you, it was laid on your heart to go to, as far as out of that 40 some groups of people?
Our field leader was telling us about one of the places that he would like for us to see. And so he personally took us there. But before I tell you that, I want to tell you that when we were finishing our language school training, there was a couple that came to our door, and Paul had grown up with Judy on the mission field in Paraguay. And so they had come, she and her husband and two little girls came to meet us. And she said to me as she was leaving, wouldn't it be amazing if we ended up working together? We're going to Colombia. And I wrote that in my journal. And
Yeah.
almost to the day, a year later, we were assigned to work with that couple. So that was rather interesting. But so our field leader took us on a trip. It was several days, wasn't it? Journey, couple, 2 or 3 days
Mhm.
on a boat trip. I had a 6-month-old baby and a
Mhm.
little, a 6-week-old baby. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
And then a almost 2-year-old.
Mm.
And so we ended up at a village, and when we stepped out onto the bank, this little Indian grandma came running up, grabbed my 6-week
Oh.
baby, and took off with her into the village.
Oh my.
And I was just stunned, but
Yeah.
I didn't do anything about it. I just let her go. And I found out later that they checked her out to see if it was a boy or a girl, and then they nursed her.
Oh my.
Wow.
goodness. Wow.
So that was my introduction.
Introduction.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I think I would have freaked right out.
It was very amazing. But anyway, so we traveled upriver from that place another couple of days, and then went to the couple's house that said, wouldn't it be something if we ever ended up working together? They lived in a village called Yuri. And we realized when we went there that that would be where we would want to work, where we
Mhm.
felt the Lord would have us to, not right with them. We
Right.
located,
About 70 miles upriver in a
we-
different village.
yeah, we located 70 miles upriver from them. So we saw them once or twice a year
Yeah.
in the beginning of our ministry.
So-
The reason for that was we wanted to be exposed without being, if we were in the same village with them, we might tend to just kind of congregate together and speak in English. But
Right.
we needed to be immersed right in the language and
Exactly.
speaking and learning the language where we were, of the
So-
tribe we were with.
When you located 70 miles upriver, was it pretty much the same language group of peoples that?
Yes, it was the same tribal group. Yes,
Okay.
they lived along that branch of the river.
Okay.
And there were just spotted villages all up the river. And so we could get together if we needed to. And I had a little speedboat and I could just zip down river
Yeah.
real easy.
I was wondering
And,
if that's how you transported, by river mostly then.
yes, we had no highways there, no airplanes at that point. And so it was our only means of travel was by river.
By river. Wow.
And so
Okay.
when you first kind of staked out your area, what was that like? Did you have to, I'm sure you wanted to be careful that you didn't get into the area and establish a home for your family, build a hut, or I can't imagine what it was like in the first few weeks, and then beginning to get to know them after this experience that your wife had.
Well, there were several tribes in the area. That means several different tribal language groups in the area, in that area. But and so we felt the Lord wanted us to work with the one tribe,
Mhm.
and they were scattered along that river. Even though there might be, I think there was one village in between that belonged to a different tribe, speak a different language too. But that was how we chose to be, and we would travel, and every 6 months there would be a gathering of all of the people in a given area of a day's trip from a certain village. They would have people from 5 or 6 different villages would show up, and the tribe we were working with had missionaries in there before.
Mhm.
A missionary, but they only taught them in Spanish. And so
It was a lady.
it was a lady, and she had a tremendous influence on the people. They
Mhm.
loved her, and they just looked at her as their grandma, and so it affected their whole culture by having these conferences and meetings during the week
Okay.
and so on. But the thing is, they had not really, because she was teaching in Spanish, their
Mhm.
understanding of the gospel was twisted, and it wasn't, they didn't, and so, but anyway, we found that out later, and we had gone in to learn the language to just ground them in the word. And
Yeah.
this, they needed, and the missionary that had been there, she told us they just need grounding in the word.
Uh-huh.
And so she was all forced to move in there and to learn the language and teach them in their language. So anyway, it was later on that we found out that they really had a very twisted understanding of what the gospel was. It had to do with their giving a testimony or attending church or attending these conferences.
Mhm.
And so, but we would, every 6 months, we would go to these conferences, and there's that, after practicing, we would be using our language in these larger groups. And so we would travel around with these other, the missionaries from downriver, as well as this lady missionary. And we weren't ready to start teaching the people yet because we didn't have the language that well, but they wanted us to share. And so we would go through an interpreter.
Okay.
And
The
so,
thing of it is we began to learn the language, we realized that they didn't have a clue what salvation was.
Yeah.
So we had to learn it thoroughly and then start
Uh-huh.
from scratch.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you about our first trip into the tribe, into
Yes.
that village where we were going to live. We got stranded on the river. We ran out of gas,
Oh, no.
and it was high water
Flood
season.
stage.
It was flood stage.
Wow.
And so you could see you could pull up to the trees, but there was water all the way back into the banks, and it was very dense with vines and everything. So we could not get to
there's a place to
land.
get on shore.
And when we ran out of gas, it started to rain, and we were pulling from vine to vine, trying to get up the river, and went right into a hornet's nest.
Oh,
And we were in this tiny, tiny little speedboat that Paul had made. It only had one seat in it, or maybe
Two
two.
seats.
Where he could sit on a little plank, and then one for the kids and I. And
You had a backrest on your seats.
anyway, so we went through all of this awful stuff to get upriver. And
Wow.
finally, when we got there, it was dark. And this was the
It
first
rained that
time we
day.
had gone to this village as a family. And so the people came down the muddy bank with little kerosene lanterns that they'd made out of a can. And so the flickering light on their faces, you couldn't really distinguish who they were. It was just, it was very uncomfortable. And when we
Yes.
stepped out of the boat, our
2-year-old.
oldest, she was 2, she slipped and slid in the mud. And so she was covered in mud. They led us to this hut, and Paul scrounged around and he found a mattress that he laid on a couple of bark planks, and put a mosquito net over us. And that's all we could find that night. And we just laid across that single mattress, all 4 of us,
4 of you. Wow.
with a muddy daughter. And I was so discouraged. And I said,
Yeah.
why have you brought me to this place? And Paul was praying throughout the night, and he just asked the Lord to help them to encourage the family.
Mhm.
And the next morning, he had everything totally set up, and we began language study the
The following
following day.
Oh my
The Lord
So-
just kind of laid out in my mind, just this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I just did each thing. And by the end of the day, we were all set up, had our
Yeah.
beds figured out, and
It was,
our shelves for our supplies and everything was all set up, and in our refrigerator and
we
Uh-huh.
only had, it was two small rooms. One, the bark slats came up to about our waist, and that was one room.
Uh-huh.
And we had a table, 2 benches, a tiny little stove, and a refrigerator that hardly worked. And then we had 3 beds, and that was it.
Wow.
And but I forgot to tell you that we pulled for hours from branch to branch, and there were anacondas, there were
Oh, my
I mean, it
goodness.
was very, very dangerous. The Lord
Yeah.
really protected us.
I
But
imagine.
we finally got to a village that was below the one we were going to, and they loaned us some gas.
Oh, so that was how you got to that the original?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So some of the supplies must have already been floated down and set up for you? Like you referred?
No, well, we were on a large, there was from another tribe, there was a missionary, I mean, the tribal man who had a huge canoe. And
Mm.
so we put all of our stuff in it and even my speedboat on top of it.
Yeah.
And we took off upriver, and it was going to be a couple-day trip up.
Mhm.
And so that he was going up. And so when we got to our co-laborers village in UD that Pam mentioned, we decided we would spend the night, and our driver, the one who owned this large canoe, was going to visit some relatives in the next village up. And so, and he would wait for us there for us to arrive. Well, when we arrived there the next day, they said, "Oh, he left 3 hours ago." And so, and I didn't have a full tank of gas. Had I had a full tank, I would have made it all the way to the village.
Right, right.
But anyway, I didn't think that out very well.
No.
But after that, I never ran out of gas. That was the only time.
Learned
Wow.
the first time.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. So how long did it take for you to, in terms of immersion into the language? And then maybe you could talk to us about the, I guess, highlight moments when you really began to see the Lord open up their hearts and where they began to get a aha moment in their own language about the basics of the gospel and Jesus coming to the earth in their language. Maybe you could kind of walk us through.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we noticed right away is that the people, they would, at these conferences, they would give a testimony, and their testimony was about some event that happened in their life that may have had a spiritual emphasis or not.
Mhm.
And we noticed that these things were just not really adding up to, they said,
Yeah.
but since I have, I gave my life over to Jesus, I've walked with him, and I've never sinned. And but he'd just been beating his wife, or he had been drunk and beaten
Also,
his
this is
wife.
what I
And
was
so
saying. Yeah.
and so we knew something was not right. And the
Right.
captain of the village, who was a believer, and
Mhm.
I questioned him carefully, and he really understood what salvation was, and that Jesus Christ was the one that provided that for him with his death on the cross and resurrection. And so anyway, he came to me. He says, "Why is it that the people, they give their testimonies and they say they've been walking with Jesus, but their lives never show it?" So he
could
was seeing
see.
something, and
Yeah.
I had been meeting with some of the men too, and going through scriptures, even though at that time it had to be only in Spanish, as much as Piopoco as I could think of,
Mhm.
and the tribal language. And so anyway, it was they felt a need there, but it wasn't until some years later that when we had moved up into the out into the plains area, that was where the people began to, as we taught, we were more proficient in the language, and we were able to give them the gospel and talk to them in abstract terms, which the Bible is about. And so in their language, and that was when we began to see, the things. And so they were saying things like, "Oh, can we go out and can we kill a capybara, as a sacrifice, and offer that as a sacrifice to God?" And we said no. We had been teaching them through the Old Testament.
Right.
And then we got to the 10 Commandments, and as we were teaching those, and we told them, we said, "But the thing is if you break one of these, you've broken all of them."
Mhm.
It's kind of like a chain. If one link is broken, the chain is no good. It's
Exactly.
broken.
Yeah.
And it's not, and so it's just one thing. And so when they began to realize, and as we taught about the commandments, they realized that they had broken all of them.
There
Mhm.
was no hope.
And they said,
hope,
there's,
right.
there's no hope for us.
Yes,
And we said, you've got to wait and listen, because there is hope.
yes, just
The
wait.
sad part is that the insurgents drove us out of that village where there began to be a breakthrough.
Oh,
So
but
we were
Joe,
driven from place to place by the insurgents over the years.
that's the enemy.
um,
Yeah.
We finally ended up in one village down near the Venezuelan border, and we were not seeing anything happening. And you need to realize it took 15 years for all of our team members to get that language
Yes.
where we could speak proficiently.
Uh-huh.
And that was due to being driven from place to place, being
Mhm.
driven out of the work by anti-God, by,
There were officials that were,
they didn't want missionaries
they
in the
didn't want
country.
us in there. They knew that what we would teach them would change their culture.
That's
Well,
true.
the thing is, we weren't in there to try and change their culture.
No.
Infanticide, they practiced. They did all kinds of things that even their own rules, they went against their own rules
Mhm.
in the tribe. But and
The
so
Gospels were changed.
and so the gospel, well,
Mhm.
once they got the gospel, there was a change that took place in their lives.
Mhm.
And they no longer killed twins when the twins were born, because they felt one was an evil spirit and they didn't know which one was. And I began to share with them. I said, I have brothers, the ones you saw playing the bells. I said,
Yeah.
at that time they were in their 40s. I said, they're 40 years old. They love
Mhm.
Jesus, and they're walking, they
No
live
need.
for him and walking with him.
Mm.
And so after that, they started letting them live. And what an interesting thing is, when we moved into the tribe, there was only about 1,400 people in the whole tribe.
Uh-huh.
When we left, there was close to 5,000.
Because
And this
Oh,
was
because of
because
this.
they were no longer doing
Yeah.
witchcraft on one another, poisoning one another because of a death in a family. They weren't killing babies when there was a deformity or something that's out of the ordinary. Or the twins was a
Uh-huh.
big one, because you couldn't, it was a kind of a, they just didn't know which one was the demon, and which one was because they felt that the spirit was imitating
Yeah.
this one, and so they'd kill them, they'd kill them. So
And we introduced penicillin. We did a lot of medical work. We delivered babies and sewed people up and all of that kind of thing. But to tell you when the work broke wide open for us, we were on the Venezuelan border in a village, and we just were not seeing spiritual fruit like we wanted to see it and felt like it needed to happen. So we decided to get together with our coworkers and pray earnestly every single day at noon.
Yeah.
And so we were doing that. And then this one day, our coworkers were due to come over to our hut. And I just felt the Spirit of God leading me to go to a part of the village. And Paul said, Pim, where are you going? And I said, I have to go see Diley. Diley was a village prostitute. She had several children by different men. She would swagger by the building where we were meeting. It was just poles in the ground and a thatched roof open to the air. And she would make fun of all of us and everything. She wanted nothing to do with God, nothing to do with us. And she just poked fun at us. And so the Lord laid her on my heart, and I prayed for her throughout the day, throughout the nights, for about a week. And so this one day when we were going to pray with our coworkers, I felt like I needed to go right then to see her. And Paul said, where are you going? He said, our coworkers are coming to pray. And I said, I can't explain it. I just have to go. Well, I walked down to that end of the village, and there was not a soul. There were no dogs, which I was terrified of because they were mean. They treated their dogs really mean. And Diley was all alone. She was sitting outside on a log. And I thought, Lord, what am I going to say to her? So as I'm walking up to her, before I could say anything, she looked up at me and she said, I've been sitting here waiting for you. Aren't you going to tell me about God? I couldn't believe it. I gave her the gospel. She
God.
listened intently and she said, I believe. I said, will you come with me and talk to my husband? Well, by that time, prayer meeting was over. So
Yeah.
we walked up to our hut and I said, Paul, you're not going to believe this. I want you to talk to Diley. I want you to cross check her because she's claiming
Yeah.
that she's received Christ as her savior. So he did, and he said, Pam, she really understands. And so he said, Diley, will you get up in the meeting tomorrow and will you tell people what's happened to you? She stood up, she shared what her
The next stage.
the next day,
Yeah.
her belief in the Lord Jesus Christ, and she sat down and two other women popped up and said, we believe too. We were listening to the rest, well, Paul and Pam,
Yeah.
talking to, it was a little boy and girl about Jesus. And they said that right then they had believed. That is when the work broke wide open and two churches were born.
Wow, what a story. The labor is not in vain.
No,
And unless the Lord builds the house. And wow, 15 years of learning the language certainly paid off at that point. How much longer were you guys there to make sure those two churches were well established, and where did God lead you from there?
well, we were there for another, no, well, it was about another, it was another
Hard to remember.
about 5 more years.
Uh-huh.
And we were there, but and we were able to, but the guerrillas kind of moved around in different areas, and when they would come into an area, we'd have to just not go to that area anymore.
Yeah.
And so this was how we would switch around to different areas. But and that's what took us down near the border to that one village. But then we had gone on furlough, home assignment for a while, and then we had gone back down to the field, and we were ministering to these churches that were easily accessible, and but we could only go in for a little while and leave. We couldn't stay there continually because of the threat of these insurgents.
Yeah.
So so that was, and so and so then we had come home to our daughter's wedding,
Mhm.
and so that was during our home assignment. And so then after that, it was kind of broken up, but then because of these officials that really didn't want us working in the tribe, we had an airplane by this time that would fly our missionaries around and into tribal areas. And we had built airstrips around different tribal areas. But then these officials went to the aeronautics people and they had them shut our permits down to be able to land in those airstrips.
Wow.
So it just kind of shut us out. And then we saw that our days were numbered there.
Yeah.
And within a short while, they said, we've all got to leave. And the insurgents were really bad at that time because 5 of our missionaries had been kidnapped, and they were later killed.
Mhm.
And no, wait, there was 3.
Three first and then 2.
Yeah, 3 in Panama, and then 2 right in Colombia. Two of our dorm parents that had our kids. 2 of the men were shot by the guerrillas. They took him and held him for about a year before they shot him. And so when that happened, they told us, okay, everybody needs to leave the field.
Yeah.
We were going on furlough anyway. And so at that point we came home. And then while we were not home very long in the States, when our co-workers were confronted with machine guns, the insurgents came and told them they needed to get out. And that's quite a harrowing story in itself.
Sure.
We never did get back to the field, but and everybody had to leave. Like Paul said, we all had to get out of the country because the insurgents took over 50% of the country. And then while we were home, our mission reassigned us. They wanted us to work at our home office here in Florida.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've been. But one of the coworkers, there were 3 sets of us, and one couple went back, I think like 2 or 3 years later, and they stayed in the capital, and they paid for some of the tribal people to come to the capital to be with them, and then they began working on lesson plans and different things. But anyway, the work went forward that way. And then years later, they were able to go back into the tribe and pretty much finish up the work. So
Praise God. That's good.
yeah, and there's so many missionaries now among those tribal people that are going every direction with the gospel.
They now know what the gospel is, and they're excited about it, and they want to share. They will go into a village, and they'll teach them for 2 or 3 months,
Uh-huh.
and just starting in Genesis and going through to the ascension of Christ, and leading people to understand what salvation is, and understanding have a good understanding of who God is.
There's 3 generations of those tribal people, the Piapocos are who we
Yes.
work with. There's 3 generations of them now that know Christ.
Praise
Nice.
God. Wow. And the calming down of the violence and the opposition of the insurgents, what would you attribute that to besides prayer and continued consistency and faithfulness? They finally were able to see the good that was happening instead of, because it was quite ironic that they would oppose something that was helping their own people.
Well, they were even some of these officials were going down into the tribes, and they were saying, look, talking to the tribal people, they say, why are you want to use an outboard motor? Why don't you just use your paddles? Why are you using a shotgun? Your bows and arrows are fine. And because they didn't want their culture to change.
Right, to
They
change.
wanted to keep it something that they
Right.
could study.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is, and the people, they were saying, I'm not going to give up my outboard motor. I can get there a lot faster with that, you know.
Yeah.
And I can surely kill my animal a lot better than with that bow and arrow, you know.
Yeah. So all those changes evidently began to change the culture and the people in a good way, and the vast majority of them, as well as finding Christ. So
Right.
Through Compassion International, we've supported a little girl in Colombia for years. We started when she was 5, and she's in high school now. So it's kind of interesting. I'm
Yeah.
not sure where in Colombia she lives, but near one of their centers. So yeah, in Colombia.
do you see?
Wow. Neat.
Your picture has totally frozen, and you're breaking up.
Yeah,
So-
I know our connection here at the parsonage is not as good as next door, but we
Okay,
from the house, and she didn't really want to go outside, so we stayed here tonight. So
Yeah,
it's
it's a
cold.
little inclement out there.
yeah, but I think we
It's
got most
okay.
of it, and we're just gonna have to do another one in a few months, because I just love to hear your stories. But I think we wrapped it up in a good way. Maybe if we did a third one, your granddaughter was, by the way, congratulations that you guys are gonna be great grandparents.
That's exciting.
But
Yeah.
she said
Thank you.
your granddaughter, great granddaughter, yeah, was saying, oh, my grandparents could tell you so much more. You need to do more than 2 shows. I said, I wish I could, and maybe some point we could sort of revisit what we've done here, but I really think that yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So the question I wanted to know, and I think I mentioned it to you, so I'm not sure how many kids you ended up having.
4.
4?
We're frozen.
We're
4
frozen?
children.
There was 4 children.
Okay.
Yes,
So, and they were all with you over,
There were 3 girls and a boy.
okay,
Okay.
and they were with you over there. Were they all over there with you?
Yes.
Okay. Because-
Right.
so-
yes. We,
Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that it's like 2 families, because we had 2, and then 6 years later, we had 2 more. So
Yeah.
they were separated out as far as their schooling and all, and so I taught them up through the lower grades,
Mhm.
and then they went to our mission school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, because I was curious, I've heard stories of missionaries who sent their kids off to boarding school or
Yeah.
something. And I always, wondered about the decisions people make to take their kids with them or not. And what helps you to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah.
Well, what happened with us was that, I don't know, nobody told Paul and I this, but I looking back, we just know that the Lord did this in our lives. We had the mindset that when we went with her and took our children, that it was a family affair. It was not mom and dad going and taking the children along
Right.
just for the ride.
Mhm.
And so they were as involved emotionally, spiritually, physically in that work as we were. And especially when the girls became teenagers and came back and did their high school in the village, they became very active in it. Very important part of that ministry. In fact, I want to tell you something that the two older girls did. It takes so much time to live in a village, so much just living.
Yeah.
And so the girls said that they came to us and they said that the Lord had laid it on their hearts to cook all of the meals for 1 solid year so I could devote myself to finish up my language study.
Wow.
And they held true to that. They did that. And I was able then to pass all of the language tests and to be proficient in the language. So that in itself was a big ministry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when Paul and our coworker would teach, they would sit among the people and listen for the comments that were made. And they would note them down so that they could share with us how the people were interpreting what was being taught.
That's powerful.
And they would even go, they would go visit the people and they would say, what did you understand about what my dad taught about, or what they called him Uncle Wayne.
Uncle Wayne.
That the kids called the other missionaries Uncle and Aunts, what he taught. And so they would get feedback, which was very helpful to us.
Yes.
Mhm.
And all of our kids thanked us for sending them to the mission school. It would have been unkind to have kept them in the village because of the immorality. There was a lot of immorality at that time.
Yeah.
And they would have lost touch with their own culture to quite a degree. In fact, our oldest daughter, at the age of 6, maybe, I think, she bemoaned the fact that she was American. She wanted to be a tribal person. And that was quite a story in itself too. There's so many other little sidetracks, but
Yeah.
we needed to get her so that when she incorporated back into the American culture, as when she came home for Bible college, that she would be able to adapt and all. But anyway, they all did real well, and they're all walking with the Lord.
Praise God.
Nice.
That's such a blessing.
Yeah.
Wow.
It is.
that's
It's
great.
God.
It
Yeah.
sure is God. And he led you all the way with that. And someday a book, I'm sure. You're gonna,
That'd be cool.
I'm sure with all the journals that you've kept and the stories you have and your own children and having their stories, there's plenty of fodder to lay it all out there.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
But right now you're busy writing curriculum still, and you, Pam, have the future hope of maybe doing a radio show.
Well, I've
You were approached.
mission leadership asked me to do many biographies
Oh.
of our retirees
Uh-huh.
because they had some fantastic stories to tell, pioneer missionaries that really went out there and
Mhm.
they really sacrificed to do what was done. And the younger generation that's coming along now, they don't have that that background
Appreciate
in missions like they did. And so they wanted them to know what it was like for those that preceded them.
Yes.
So that it would encourage them, it would motivate them, you know. So then they started sending these around to all our training center, these stories
Mhm.
that I wrote. And then back in November, I think it was,
Wow.
one of the men that headed up the communications department, is working in that department anyway, asked if I would be willing to narrate these stories
That's
for
great.
radio. So I haven't heard back from him yet, but I know he's coming to Florida, so we'll be in touch with him.
We'll be
That's
praying,
great.
we'll be praying that'll work out for you.
Thank you.
And Paul, on your end, continuing, as I mentioned, the curriculum, writing that up and disseminating it to missionaries on the field, or,
Right now, I'm checking it in different languages.
okay,
They send a back to English translation and I can check it out. Well, in the one that I'm doing right now, I can use the translator on the computer that the computer has, because it will translate it. But it does a pretty poor job, but it does help me to know when something's really askew, because, and it can be just, part of it can be the translator itself that really changes something,
sure.
so anyway, I write out questions when I go check across a certain portion,
Mhm.
and it's saying something that the lesson does not teach at all.
That's good.
And so as I do that, I'll write a comment in the note. You know, the computer has it set up so you can add a comment
Oh, cool.
and or even ask a question. And so I do that. Then I send it to them, and then they check it over, and they probably get a laugh out of some of the things I ask questions about. But sometimes they come across things that they missed,
They missed,
and
right.
or they misspelled, or you know, it's just a matter of just getting it so it's in fine shape. And I just got a bunch of lessons back from them, and I'm going to send them another bunch. So we're in that process of just cleaning it up, and so. Because they've done an excellent job of
Putting it in
translating
there.
it, and I'm just real thrilled, and can't wait till they can get it and start teaching it around.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's great.
He also checks to make sure that culturally,
Mm,
the portions that he asks for them to send back to him, he checks it to make sure that culturally they're communicating.
relates to their
Mhm.
culture,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
That's
and
very
so because in the lessons themselves, it gives illustrations that are like from the Philippines,
Mhm.
but in Alaska,
Yeah,
you're not going to go swimming in with the tropical fish up in Alaska.
right.
right.
You know,
Those
and you don't,
changes need to be made, yeah.
yeah, so you have to get something that's relevant to that culture, and
Wow.
they have that liberty of choosing a relative. We just kind of give them an idea of what they need to be aiming for,
Right,
and then they can supply the illustration to
yeah.
bring that to light.
He's worked with many, many languages all over the world
Wow,
in the time that he's been doing this. So.
that's
That's
rewarding.
so
Wow,
interesting.
sure is. Well,
Wow.
thank you guys for being on, and maybe we'll touch base in a few months, and we'll stay connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Facebook and maybe.
Well, it's been a
Pick some
privilege and a
highlights.
joy.
Oh, we
It's
sure,
been wonderful.
we sure are blessed doing this, and we hope that everybody else was, and we encourage other people to share the interview tonight, and we'll trim it up and send it this second copy. God bless you.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
very good. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
It's nice to see you, Amy.
Good to
Yeah,
see you
Lord bless
guys.
you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye
Bless
now.
you too.